In this tutorial we're going to be looking at a strumming technique that is often referred to as chucking or chunking or simply palm muting with the strumming hand. The terms chucking or chunking come from the sound that's created when playing this strum. I will probably use both terms throughout this video, but they both mean the same thing. The principle of this technique is to give a percussive sound to our playing and to simulate the beats of the drummer's snare drum or perhaps somebody clapping along with the beat. This technique can be used with various rhythms or strumming patterns that we play on the ukulele, and we'll have a look at some of these later on in the video. But first, let me demonstrate the difference between a normal calypso or island strum and then me adding a chuck or a chunk to beats 2 and 4 of the bar. If you're unfamiliar with the calypso or island strum, it would be a good idea to check out the video I've linked to in the card above my head here before continuing with the tutorial. I'll be using a standard C or C major chord for the purpose of this tutorial, but of course it can work with any chord. So without the chunk or chuck, and now with the chunk or chuck. But before we get into playing this technique as part of the strumming pattern, as I've just demonstrated, let's look at breaking down the actual chunk or chuck technique first. Also, please consider subscribing to the channel, as it really helps me out with making these video tutorials moving forward. The percussive sound of the chuck is caused by us strumming down on the chord with a finger or fingers, and then immediately muting all the strings by letting the palm of our hand fall flat across all 4 strings. Important to note here that the chuck or the chunk really only works on a down strum. I tend to prefer to use my index finger or first finger for the strum, but you could equally use any of your other fingers or a combination of more than one, or even all 4 if you choose. I would say it's definitely easier to play this strum with your hand open, with the fingers you're not using splayed out, like so. This allows easy access to the muting. A closed fist with just the strumming finger out will probably make it a little harder to mute. Depending which fingers you use may affect which part of the palm of your hand ends up muting the strings. I find that when I use my first finger to strum, I end up using the fleshy part at the base of my thumb here to mute. If I were maybe using my ring finger or my pinky, I would end up using more the side of my palm at the base of my little finger. And if I were to use all my fingers to strum, I would probably use the whole of my palm. It doesn't really matter which finger or fingers you choose to strum with, or which part of the palm of your hand you use to mute. I would encourage you to experiment with all options and find what works for you best. The strum and mute needs to be in one motion, so it only takes one beat, like so. And not a strum and a mute like this, which is 2 motions. So practice trying to get the strum and then the mute all in one action. You want to briefly hear the chord sound, but then to mute immediately after. So you want to keep your strums small, and you definitely don't want to strum down so far that your hand ends up below the strings, like this, as you will physically have to come all the way back up in order to mute. So think of it as just your finger or fingers strumming down to end up below the strings, but leaving your thumb behind, above the strings, so you can bring the rest of your hand down to mute. Another way of looking at it would be to imagine flicking something off of your finger or fingers, and then in the same motion bring your hand down to rest on the strings. So, or perhaps you could think of it as rotating your wrist as you strum down with your finger, with your palm ending up resting against the strings, like so. Remember, you do want to hear the chord ring briefly before the mute, so it's not just a completely muted chord like this. So now feel free to pause the video here and practice the different methods or approaches I've just mentioned to see how you can make this technique work the best for you. When you're happy with it or feel like you're making progress, restart the video and we'll look into how we can fit the chuck into a strumming pattern. Okay, so now let's look at how we can add this technique into a normal strumming pattern. But before we do, please note, don't worry if this technique takes a while for you to get. For most people, it's probably going to take a couple of weeks or more of trying it regularly before it starts to sound how you want it to. For some people, it may take longer still. As I mentioned before, the chuck or chunk is normally replicating where we would clap to the beat of the song or where the drummer would hit the snare drum. And this is on beats 2 and 4 of the bar, or what is known as the backbeat. If you imagine a drum kit playing a straight rock beat with the bass or the kick drum playing the 1 and the 3 of the bar and the snare drum hitting on the 2 and the 4, you'd end up with something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Boom, chuck, boom, chuck, boom, chuck, boom, chuck, boom, chuck, and so on. So we would generally want our chucks or chunks on the beats 2 and 4 of the bar. Normally we would show a chunk in a strum pattern with an X as per the diagram, and remember that it's always going to be replacing a down strum. In the diagram shown we have a normal down strum on the first and third beat of the bar and the chuck on beats 2 and 4. Please note there are no upstrokes or upstrums in this pattern. That would sound something like this. So now try playing along with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have just played several bars of down, chunk, with no ups played between them. It is also completely normal to play chucks with an up strum straight after them. So first try playing an isolated chuck with an up strum straight after it, like so. So then try playing like this, as per the diagram. So down, up, chunk, up. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And again. One more time. What we're doing here is we're playing a down on beat 1, an up on the and after 1, a chunk on beat 2, and an up on the and after 2. And then we're going to rest or not play for beats 3 and 4 of the bar. So let's try playing this with a metronome set at 90 beats per minute, and I'll count us in, and then we'll play the first half of the bar as we did before, so down, up, chunk, up, and then we'll rest for the second half of the bar. If you get lost, stop the video and move it back to here and try again until you get it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now let's fill in the rest of the bar by just playing the same thing again. So we're now playing down, up, chunk, up, down, up, chunk, up. So. Okay, so let's now do the same with the metronome. If you get lost, stop the video and move it back again until you get it. And remember to take your time and not to worry if it's taking you a while. This is completely normal. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so finally we're going to put this in context of the calypso or the island strum. As I said earlier in the video, if you're unfamiliar with the calypso or island strum, it would definitely be a good idea to check out the video I've linked to before continuing with this last pattern. So, if the pattern for the calypso or island strum looks like this, if we replace the downs on beats 2 and 4 with a chuck, we'd end up with this. It might, again, be worth splitting the bar into 2 and playing the first half on its own. So, down, chunk, up, rest. Down, chunk, up, rest. So we're playing beat 1 as a down, missing the up on the and after 1, then playing a chuck on beat 2, and then an up strum on the and after 2. Once again, down, chunk, up, with a rest afterwards. Down, chunk, up. Ideally your hand wants to finish down again after this, so we're ready to play the second half of the pattern. So if we play along with a metronome, you'll hear 2 clicks on their own after we've strummed this sequence, and these would be beats 3 and 4 of the bar. So 1, 2, 3, 4, down, chunk, up, down, chunk, up, down, chunk, up, down, chunk, up, without me counting. So to play the second half on its own, start with your hand down, listen for 3 clicks on the metronome, and then play up, chunk, up immediately after. So on the beats and 4 and. So hopefully it would sound something like this. 1, 2, 3, up, chunk, up. 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 So let's just try that with the metronome. 1, 2, 3, up, chunk, up. 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 And without me counting. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So finally, we're going to put the whole thing together and play the full island strum or calypso strum with chucks or chunks on beats 2 and 4. So without the metronome, it's going to sound something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And with the metronome, 1, 2, 3, 4. So once again, practice this pattern and the other patterns we've looked at until you feel comfortable with it, and you're getting a nice crisp chuck on beats 2 and 4. Don't be put off if it takes you a while to get it. This is quite normal, and regular practice, little and often, is generally the key to improvement. So that brings us to the end of this tutorial. If you found it helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel, as I regularly post new tutorials for ukulele at all different levels. Please give the video a thumbs up and feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions. Thanks so much for watching, and bye for now.